Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project conceived entirely to let me spend more time with interesting people than I would ever get on the radio. Although, to be fair, Sir Gareth Southgate, in your case we probably would have made an exception on the radio show. Here's a first. I had to get up early this morning because we're recording this before normal business. And my wife asked who I was getting out of bed early for. I said Gareth Southgate, and she said, without even pausing, tell him I love him. Which has never. I mean, you can look at the list of people who've sat in that chair before, and she's never done it anything like that before. So I obviously said, "Why?" Forgive me.
That's a fair question.
And she said, "He's so honourable. He's so decent. He's saved football, and the way he looked after those young men is absolutely extraordinary." And I didn't know she knew all that because she's not the world's biggest football fan by any stretch of the imagination. When did you realise that you'd sort of crossed out of the world of football into something rather different?
Well, some interactions like you've just mentioned, really. And actually, very often ladies of a certain age. But I think quite often with children, and particularly with young boys. So I think, I think as a nation, probably across the world, we're thinking a lot about what's going on with young boys and the need for good role models and the need for certain standards. And I suppose the beauty of being in football all my life is that I always had a coach. I was able to help take young lads on that journey as they develop through their teenage years, late teens especially. I guess unintentionally, we were also thrown into some situations with the team that meant we ended up talking about different things. So I think the national team is different to club football. You know, it is a bit of a mirror on the country, and there are occasions where everybody comes together to watch.
Generationally, though, you could have gone the other way, couldn't you? I mean, right on the cusp of people who are encouraged and are comfortable to talk about what's going on inside, and people who were absolutely allergic to it. You know, our father's generation would not really go there. Some exceptions, of course. So when you were, I presume that it was still a fairly primitive environment.
Yeah, I was smiling there because I was just thinking about what we've been discussing and then thinking what my upbringing at Crystal Palace was like.
Yeah.
No, definitely. Look, at football is a very masculine alpha world. In those days, the game itself was much more combative in this country than it is now. And I was not intentionally brought up to keep my emotions in check, but I would have followed the examples of my dad and my grandfather, and so I think inherently you took that view. But I guess as I got older, particularly when you're leading people, I recognise that I think people do react well to some vulnerability. And over the years, I've had several interactions with the armed forces, and they've talked about that. And that really surprised me because you'd think that would be somewhere where that was impossible.
Of course.
And yet, you open your eyes a little bit and you say, no, actually, men everywhere. There are different sides to all of us. There's this image of what it might be, or this perception of what it should be, but the reality is we all go through an incredible range of emotions every day.
And not necessarily an environment in which you'd start shouting it from the rooftops from a very early age. But you mentioned leadership, and the new book, Dear England, Lessons in Leadership, is fairly self-explanatory. But you were 13, I think, when your PE teacher or your football coach spotted that you were captain material, or possibly even younger. Steve Avery was the teacher at the time. That's an extraordinarily young age for somebody to think that you have leadership skills. What do you think he saw?
Well, I think when you're a young player, normally they give the better player the armband.
Exactly, yeah.
But also I was probably a bit more sensible than some of the others. Yeah. It wasn't But what was interesting is that I think then that takes you into situations where you do then have to impact the rest of the group. You are tasked with small responsibilities of looking after the opposition, or and then in the middle of games, can you do things on the pitch that inspire the rest of the team? And then how do you talk to the rest of the team when things go well or things don't go well? So Yeah, I think you find yourself in positions that allows you to develop leadership.
But that came naturally to you then. Elements of it must have done.
Well, some elements did, but I'm quite an introvert, really.
Right.
So I'm now at 55 very comfortable going into any environment just because of the life experiences I've had.
Yeah.
But when people say that leaders are born, I wouldn't actually agree with that. I think the experiences we have through our life put us in situations that allow yourselves to develop. And because I've seen so many different personalities that have led but in different ways.
So there's no identikit kind of cookie cutter
leadership
template.
I don't think so. I mean, I've got a preference because it's my personality. And, one of the things I explain in the book is that I've seen other people with a completely different approach achieve success. I think you've got to be authentic to yourself as a leader, because people will smell it a mile off if you're not being natural. And I think that's as important as anything else.
I think for football fans of our age, I don't know why, but the words Brian Clough just appeared in my mind, very, very, very big letters in the back of my mind. So I mean, most of this probably started at home, which was Watford in Hertfordshire. Your family's always been described as close-knit, although you're not just an introvert, are you? You're actually quite a private man. I know your parents' names, and I know that your dad worked his way up from being a builder, I think, to being a manager at IBM. It struck me, preparing for this conversation, I've had a lot of actors in lately, and it struck me that there are similarities in the sense that putting all or nothing on a slightly fairy tale career from quite a young age. It's the same for actors, and a lot of parents would be like, I don't know about that, son. They'd certainly want you to have a backup or a safety net. So what was the relationship from quite a young age between your talent and your future at home?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have that conversation with other parents now.
Yes.
Particularly some parents in a friendship group of mine that have got kids who are actors. And
really?
And they have that very conversation.
It's exactly the same, right?
Yeah, but, my mum would have been immediately thinking, not many people make it. I guess we're always thinking about what might go wrong. I was doing reasonably well at school, but I had this point at 16 where you either go for it, take what was an apprenticeship at the time, or you stay on, take A-levels and go a different route. But I definitely felt that was a point at which you got to throw yourself into it full time. Kids nowadays in all of these talent pathways, football, acting, dancing, music, they probably have to commit even earlier than that, which is something that worries me.
Yeah, of course.
Because I think they're so young and they don't know all the pitfalls, and we build their hopes up so much. But I know that making that commitment at that point meant there was no life raft, and that doesn't mean that was the reason I got through, because a lot of kids committed in the same way and didn't quite get there. But there are so many steps along the way that these things can go wrong. So
of course,
when I see youngsters that are achieving these things, you realise it's so difficult to get through all the stages to be a sports person.
There's something so poignant about those photos, isn't there, of like an under-16 team when 4 or 5 of them have gone on to be household names, like massive stars. We're thinking of United, which was your childhood team, or a club like that, and then 4 or 5 of them had good careers, and then there's always 2 or 3 who went absolutely nowhere, and it could have been any of you.
Definitely. Well, part of my role with England before I took the first team was working with all the age group teams so you could have under 17 international players, so the best in our country, and I used to go and talk to them and the parents, and we'd have a meeting and we'd say, look, it's brilliant what you've achieved. You should be so proud of your son, and boys, you should be so proud to be here. But I've got to tell you, there's a reality here that some of you won't even have a career in professional football, even though they're the best at that age group. And that is the reality. You in any year group with England, maybe 3 or 4 would get through to the seniors. Some would have a career in the game, and some, some will get an injury, some will fall out of love with the game, some will just be rejected and not be able to bounce back from that disappointment. So yeah, it's tough. Sports, look, life challenges all. You've had all of those moments along the way where I'm sure you've had days where you thought, no, it's not for me. I've had enough of this.
Tell me about it.
And now now you are where you are, and people will think, well, what an amazing life, but it's hard along that way.
And can you tell? I mean, do you get inklings about the lads who are not going to make it, or is it as much of a surprise to you as it is to them?
Yeah, that's a great question, because with some players it becomes apparent. I mean, for example, if you think about the players that make it, there are some obvious talents that are so good that they just stand out. But you do get, I had Harry Kane as a 18-year-old. He'd been on loan 3 times. He was really struggling to break into Leyton Orient's team, Leicester. You knew he had ability, but I could never have said he'd be England's record goal scorer in 10, 15 years. So his resilience, his desire to keep learning, to keep improving, to bounce back from those setbacks, definitely resilience and this, he now has a mindset of trying to master what he does. Whereas some lads, the heartache of rejection or injury and the disappointment, or it's at an age where 16, 17, 18, which are really important years for developing in professional sport, the brain's still rewiring. They might be in with the wrong group of friends, they might not have the support at home, and the opportunity can be gone in a couple of years, and then they're onto something different.
Never get it back. Speaking of support at home, you've mentioned that your mum would have been quite sanguine about the dangers of the career. What about your dad? Were you in any sense sort of living his dream? Was he a kind of football crazy?
No, I mean he did play football when he was younger, but he was on Luton Town's books as a kid, but there was no money in football. So he did. He took the other option. He took a career that he knew he'd have a skill. I was fortunate. He was always supportive but never pushy. And of course, again, when I started playing, there wasn't life-changing money.
No,
football was well paid, but you were still. I started on 20.
You need to do something afterwards.
You did, yeah, absolutely. And so it wasn't as if whatever I earned might change the family's life, which is the case now for youngsters. So I was allowed to develop in a supportive environment. But if he was stood on the touchline, you'd never hear him shouting. He'd just quietly watch.
When do you think? Because I mean, every 11-year-old boy wants to be a footballer when they grow up. But I mean, when do you think, looking back, because you wouldn't have known at the time that became a realistic prospect for you?
Yeah, it wasn't realistic until 15, 16. Yeah. And by that point, I'd already been released by Southampton.
What was that like?
Heartbreaking at the moment it happened. Yeah. A bit impersonal. You just got a letter through the post. There was no sort of meeting.
It's brutal.
When I look back, although the dream was to be a footballer, I didn't have any awareness of the realities of what that journey was going to be at that point. And it was only when I left school, went into full-time training, you're suddenly in this men's environment where people are playing for their livelihoods. They need the win bonus to pay the mortgage, or so it's that sudden shift from this is a game I'm playing for fun with my mates to no, this is a job. And it's a very different mindset.
So this is doing a YTS at Palace, is it?
Yeah, and I really struggled with that.
Did you?
Adaptation. Yeah, I had to get 2 trains to get to the training ground before I was able to drive. I was physically a late developer, I was psychologically a bit soft.
Okay.
So I had a lot of toughening up to do when I was 16, 17, yeah.
It didn't help that you turned up in a shirt and tie. Maybe not a tie. That's probably a bit mythological.
I went no tie, but I did. I turned up first day in my school uniform because I thought, well, I guess you've got to be smart on your first day. And of course, everybody else was in tracksuits. So, yeah, to say I had problems fitting in at the start would be very fair.
I'm always fascinated by people whose external demeanour is quite in control, like you. I mean, we've used the word sensible, but obviously below the surface, you can be churning. It's just the fact that it's not immediately obvious. But probably back to leadership as well, is that you want somebody who can control themselves before you can expect them to exercise control over other people. So there's sort of two things there, isn't there? There's the heartbreak of being let go by Southampton, and then there's the little thing about feeling embarrassed and exposed when you turn up in your school uniform. These things cut deep for kids, but it wouldn't be something that necessarily everybody around you would have known or noticed.
No, definitely. I mean, I think when some of the lads were dressing up in my gear and had a pair of my shoes on dancing in the dress room, everybody would have noticed that. but they wouldn't. I don't think you realise how that tears up a youngster inside, and of course that can really affect people in the other way. I had an embarrassment. I just knew I needed to change my shoes and wear some different gear. But they are character forming moments really, where you learn. There's something about learned emotional intelligence, isn't there? How do you fit in with a group, or how do you not stand out too far from a group? And I have tremendous admiration for people who think a bit differently and actually don't worry as much as I might have done then about fitting in. They're prepared to be independent. Some of them will be probably among the most creative people in our world. And I think that shows tremendous confidence to be able to do that.
I would say that you've achieved that. Is it something you aimed for? I mean, did you look at people like that and aspire to be more like that?
No, I think that's something that I'm sort of observing at this point of my life, because I never really... I always wanted to be the person that my parents brought me up to be in terms of manners, respect for people. Definitely when I was the England manager, I realised the responsibility of the role. You're a figurehead. What you say carries weight. You are representing your country in every press conference, at every match, at every event you attend. So I felt there was an important part of being a role model in that role I had, because it has reach and it has impact on everybody, really,
But you also danced to your own tune, most obviously when you wrote the Dear England letter, which was an enormous departure from what previous football managers in general, leaders in general, had done in that kind of context. So that speaks to a knowledge of the importance of breaking out of the parameters of expectation.
Yeah, I think it was a consequence of a time we were going through, and possibly still are going through.
Sure.
As a team, we had been involved in a couple of nights where our players had experienced racism, and I hadn't fully sat and reflected on not only the importance of how we dealt with that as a team going into those situations, but also what those boys must have lived through for 20, 25 years before. Not the overt obvious things, but the day-to-day experiences that I never had to think about. And so again, with the letter, which came from an interview I did with the football website, the intention of it was just to talk about my pride in being English, how I felt that is different from my grandfather's generation to our generation, but that regardless of the fact, we had a lot of boys who were proud of their Nigerian roots or Jamaican roots, but so proud to play for England. You see that now with Maro Itoje, the England rugby captain. And the world is more fluid in that way. Our kids, it's much easier for them if they want to go and travel and live abroad. as generations pass, I think society will be more fluid. So I think we are grappling a little bit with what our modern identity is. It was more obvious for a generation, my parents who lived through a war and came through all of that. Now we're in a different time, and but I just know that my experiences with the team, where we brought people together, you get nan watching, you get kids watching, you get every community watching. People are proud to be English, and there's a lot more that unites us than divides us.
That's a lovely thought, and I agree, but it's sometimes difficult to see the road ahead as opposed to the pothole that we're currently in, or the bumps that we're currently trying to get over. You mentioned travel. We should probably reflect briefly upon the words of Alan Smith, who suggested that this is while you're still at Palace, that you might want to consider a career as a travel agent, because they were 50-50 on whether or not they were going to take you on to the next level or not. So again, another bump in the road, another slap in the face. This one hit you quite hard as well, I think. Yeah,
I mean, that was that period I was referring to earlier, where I struggled adapting from school to work, and I didn't make my full debut for Palace. I didn't really break into the team until 21. That's pretty late, and I didn't play for England until I was 25. So, but I've always been a little bit of a late developer. Had to prove myself.
You get thicker. I mean, physically, bigger. I mean, it's important.
Yeah, hard to get thicker in any other way, but
harder to knock over. I think physically and mentally.
I think what that has done is it's built resilience in me, and I've always had to prove myself. I've never been that sort of obvious talent that I talked about earlier, and so I had to be committed in a different way, because I wasn't good enough to get through without having those other attributes.
And you, I mean, to knit those two thoughts together, the one you said earlier about spotting the talents that are extraordinary and knowing that you're not one of them, but that you could develop attributes that they didn't necessarily have. There's quite, and this obviously for the football geeks who've tuned in, there's quite a seminal moment when you lined up against your former club, against Southampton, and Alan Shearer was leading the line, and I think they thumped you 6-0. And you can watch him and think, crikey, he's got the mercury, or he's got the magic.
Definitely. I mean, I think he scored a hat-trick on his debut for Southampton, I think, and he was 17, 18 when he got into their team. So you do see those players. We had people like Saka in the first team at 19, Bellingham at 17, Foden at 18. So you can spot those players. But nevertheless, they are then going to have other pitfalls along the way that life throws at you to deal with.
And Smith kind of changed his mind relatively quickly while you're putting in this level of effort. And I don't know how seminal this was, but putting you quite close to Ray Wilkins at one point.
Yeah,
who of course had captained England. That must have, I mean, a big age gap there as well. But I imagine quite influential, quite seminal.
Brilliant. I mean, I think, in fairness to Alan Smith, he saw the potential in me, which was why he said the things he said to try and trigger a response.
Leadership.
But I knew he also had care, because there were other moments where he was very supportive. So I think, when you're working with young people, you do have to challenge them, but they need to know that it's coming from a good place.
Yeah, okay.
And one without the other, you can tip the balance the wrong way. Ray Wilkins was amazing. I mean, he actually only had about 6 months with us, because he then went to manage QPR. But I remember we went on a pre-season tour, and I mean, he was just a brilliant guy. Loved working with him. He was brilliant manners. But we were a young team, and in those days, we'd go and have a few beers, and so we would play hard, work hard. And we were on a pre-season tour, and I remember the rest of the lads were going out. I was the captain, so normally I'd have been, last in the bar, first in the running. That was but I was rooming with Ray, who was obviously England international, 80 odd caps, coming towards the end of his career. And I thought, I remember saying to him, I think the lads are going for a couple of drinks. He said, yeah. He said, maybe tomorrow, I've got to be ready for training. And I remember thinking, well, I can't be going out and, Ray's first experience. so I remember the rest of the lads were absolutely killing me because I was tucked up in bed while they were out enjoying themselves. So no, he was a brilliant guy, and again, he had what I learned from Ray. He was 35. He came into a young dressing room. He could have been aloof. He could have been, but he was brilliant with the younger players. He was humble. He mucked in. He joined in with all the stupid jokes that they. But he also managed to hold his standards high. He came in a suit and tie every day.
There you go. That'll show him.
Well, he'd done that in Italy.
Of course,
he was used to doing that in Italy, and he kept this beautiful balance of fitting in while keeping his own level. And it's so sad that he passed, but he's a brilliant man. Yeah,
I see echoes there of Steve Coppell as well, who was managing Palace when you kind of moved up to the first team. Another player, that generation, that era, and it's probably the fault of newspapers. Of course, you were a famous Croydon Advertiser columnist at this stage in your life, but it was probably the fault of newspapers that we only really learned about the footballers who were a bit crazy or a bit mad, or most obviously going back to George Best and then Gazza and then the ones that might make the front pages rather than the back pages. But I've always had a fascination with Steve Coppell had a degree, didn't he? He was, and you mentioned Ray Wilkins having a very gentlemanly approach to the game. I always think Graham Lasso is underrated in that context as well. A great thinker, cerebral gentleman. You barely get noticed in the context of football reporting, sports reporting.
Yeah, well, we like to label people, don't we?
Yeah.
Steve was ahead of his time. He really should have had a bigger role within English football over the last 10, 15 years, I think. He's got so much knowledge, he's bright. And I think him and Steve Highway were two university graduates that were playing at that time, but that was it. They were kind of
almost a pub quiz question.
Well, it was. They're the university graduates. There they are over the university graduates left. Other Herberts to the right. Nothing ever went any deeper. I suppose that's one of the nice things today, that we're able to do things like this, where you have more time to talk, and I think you get a better understanding. One of the benefits of social media, perhaps, is that you see people's personalities more behind the scenes, and that isn't always easy when you're in a public-facing job.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. It is a rare plus, because it's such a sewer at the moment. But the reason why people fell in love with it in the first place was that you could, I think it's called parasocial relationships, was word of the year.
Okay.
And it is when you feel that you know people in the public eye, even though you don't, which you can cast as a negative, but you've just identified why it can be a positive as well. And it's the zeitgeist that you kind of arrived in with the Dear England letter and with that whole episode, when you're reaching people that you wouldn't really have been able to reach. When my late godfather, for example, was the News of the World's footy correspondent in the Northwest, and I'd answer the phone in his house, it'd be Kenny Dalglish on the end of the line. That was the only way they could get anything into the public space, was through a journalist. It's not true anymore.
No, and I think with the national team, our comms department did a brilliant job of that around the Russia World Cup, where there was a disconnect between the team and the fans, and clearly most of that was down to results, but it was the advent of social media, and we embedded a photographer with the team, and so instead of just seeing the stiff pictures that you get of training the day before a game, where everyone used to be on their best behaviour because the press were in. So now you had these relaxed shots from behind the scenes where you saw the lads on the inflatable unicorns and things like that. And it connected with a younger generation, but you also got more of a sense of the camaraderie that was going on behind the scenes, which was my experience playing with England, but wasn't always the public perception. And I think we benefited from that advent of social media, but also our... whenever people talk about a team and managing a team, they immediately think of the players. We had some brilliant people behind the scenes in all these departments coming up with those sorts of ideas. And they're things that I get credit for as the manager, but they're other people's ideas that I was just prepared to go with, really.
What's that? This is true in many fields, isn't it? The people that you might describe them as the right-hand men. the Peter Taylors, if you like, to go
Yeah.
back to Brian Clough. Well, what's the difference between people who've got equal love, equal passion, equal knowledge of the game, and some people are quite happy being one step down from the peak of the pyramid, and some people want to be in charge, some people want to be the leader?
Yeah, I think different personalities, different skills. Very often the leader has to have a knowledge of everything, but isn't necessarily an expert in lots of those areas. And I think if I think about, head of medical department, my assistant, Steve Holland, who with England, he'd be so detailed in the preparation of training plans, of tactical plans. Now, I had to understand all of that. And on the football side, obviously, I was more heavily involved. But, medically, I've got an understanding because I've played for 30 years. I've worked with players for a long time, but I'm not a medical expert. So I've got to be able to take in information, process information, make good decisions from the information that's given. And I think very often people in the roles where they're having to be the experts in that one area, they're perhaps a little bit happier to be out of the frontline spotlight as well.
Because they can indulge all of the passion and enthusiasm without necessarily having to indulge the abuse and the scrutiny.
Well, yeah, and also once you're in a management role in any industry, the thing that you love doing. I always talk about chefs. People are probably fed up with me talking about chefs, but chefs start because they love creating food. They love creating dishes. Once you run a restaurant, you've got far less time to do that because you've got to employ people, manage people, deal with budgets. You've got to make the thing work as a commercial enterprise. So actually the time doing what you really loved at the start is far less. And I think that's one of the chapters in the book is realising when you make these steps up in any business can take you away from the bit you love, and all of a sudden you need a different skill set because your job then is to manage other people and get the best out of other people, not just get the best out of yourself.
And we're on the bit now where people know the story to varying degrees, depending on how much they follow football and how big fans they are of Palace, then Villa, then Middlesbrough. But you are now established. So 21 at club level, you stay with Palace when they go down, and Alan Smith comes back, makes you captain, I think, after about 100 appearances. That settled on you quite easily, I sense. It kind of felt like quite a natural progression, or were you slightly awed by it?
Well, again, I was 23, 24, and you've got a dressing room with 34, 35-year-olds, so you know that some of those guys will be thinking that they should be captain, and they'll be waiting to see how you're going to deal with them. And so I was very conscious of that dynamic and making sure that, firstly, I proved myself on the pitch. I think in football, the captain, first thing is play well. But the second thing would be have the emotional intelligence to realise that if you're going to go steaming in and start confronting those older, more experienced players, then that's a dangerous route to go. So you need to, you need to earn their trust and earn their respect. And
so that's a fascinating dynamic, isn't it, from captain to manager? Because in a way, as a young captain, the respect is moving upwards. You're seeking the respect of people who sit a bit above you in the food chain.
Yep.
And then when you become manager, it's a slightly different dynamic. You need the respect of people who are technically below you. I mean, if you're a club manager, you might only be earning a fraction of what some of the players are earning these days.
Yeah.
But you're still in the hierarchy. They're below you in the food chain. So they're two different challenges, but speaking to the same dynamic, really.
Yeah, they are. And I found that shift. That took me a little while to get used to because I literally went overnight, player at Middlesbrough, straight into management. Not a route I would recommend, James.
No.
But,
what could you do in between? Just be an assistant or do a bit of coaching?
Be an assistant. Maybe work with some of the youth teams because you're learning a new trade. Really, you're learning to teach. You're learning to mentor. You're learning to manage situations. I'd never managed financial budgets. I'd never managed.
This is the chef again, isn't it?
Yeah,
really?
yeah,
I mean, very much so. It's a perfect analogy.
Chairing meetings, I'd never been in a meeting other than a players' meeting. So that is a different shift. And of course, you don't necessarily change as a person, but the way you're viewed changes, because all of a sudden at Middlesbrough, the players I played with, the decisions I make affect their careers and affect their livelihood. So, inevitably that dynamic does change.
What did you think when Steve Gibson, was it, came in and said,
"Yeah,
do you fancy taking over from Steve McLaren?"
Yeah,
as manager.
It was a huge jump, but I knew I was coming towards the end of my
35.
Yeah, I still had another year left on my playing contract, but I couldn't be at the level I had been at. I knew all the things that aging sports people realise. The body's taking longer to recover. You can't get around I was never quick, but I was even slower than. So I'd started to prepare for coaching, but I was thinking that would be as an assistant or working in the academy. In hindsight, I think I've said it's the best and the worst decision I made. Why the best? Because sometimes you've got to throw yourself into something. You can go on all the coaching courses, you can prepare, but actually the moment when you're thrown in, you're going to learn more than any other time anyway.
Yeah.
But it was the worst because I wasn't ready for that leap. The jump from not having coached even a junior team to being in the Premier League for 3 years was enormous.
Albeit, as we'll get to shortly, you did hit the ground running initially. But we can't gloss over the penalty. But I don't want to dwell on it unduly because you've talked about it, not because I'm worried about you being uncomfortable, but simply because you've said everything that there is to say about it 100 times, and understandably so, because these are the seminal moments in those moments when football transcends football and becomes a sort of national interest, a national issue. You've never fought shy of how profound a moment it was, have you? You've never tried to sort of pretend that it was anything other than cataclysmic for you personally.
Yeah. I think it was so public and so apparent that impossible to back away from.
Shouldn't be, should it? I mean, it's ridiculous, really. But then once you start picking football apart, the whole thing's bloody ridiculous. So,
that is. Yeah,
so we better not pick it apart too much.
But it was. I suppose it taught me so much, and some of those lessons were still coming out 15, 20 years later. For example, preparing our team for penalty shootouts, and
of course,
the aftermath of penalty shootouts. So. On so many levels, I failed to execute a skill under pressure. So how could I have prepared better for that? The resilience, again, the word that we keep using, but realising that probably professionally that's as difficult a moment as I was going to face.
Yeah.
So once you've been through that, anything else can't really hurt you. I think
it becomes a power.
It does, and it's quite liberating, really. So. Yeah, I'm definitely at this point. For the 6 months to a year, found it really difficult to deal with. Really difficult to move past the mistake, the public perceptions of what I would be. That was my label, if you like. That at that point was the last slide in the presentation, if you were showing your life, and now there are other things.
Sure.
That people will talk about. So I hope for young people watching, probably particularly around that Russia World Cup where we won a penalty shootout and there was that little bit of a redemption story.
Yeah, very much so.
I hope that shows people, these things will happen. Things are going to go wrong in life. You will have failures, but there is a way through. And it's tough. You have those days where you don't want to get out from under the duvet, but there's always a way through those things.
I don't know if you can answer this question. I don't know whether you've thought about it before, but what for someone not in the game, what was it most like So I know you met your wife Alison very young, didn't you? I don't know if you've ever been dumped from a great height or that feeling of waking up in the morning and just think, oh, well, is there anything you can compare it to, or was it unique?
Well, look, I guess after 3 years as manager of Middlesbrough, I was sacked, and anybody that's lost their job, you've got the personal feel of that. You've got the people around you, how that impacts them. But then you've got that slight feeling of more public humiliation because, I don't know, people at your kid's school know that you've lost the job. It's a personal thing that you've got to try and deal with, and the feeling in your stomach and all those emotional feelings that you have, you've got to try and come through that. The 2-3 days after missing the penalty, we went back. We were living in Birmingham at the time because I was at Villa. The media were right on the edge of the driveway, basically, and the driveway was only 10 yards long. I'm fortunate my driveway's a bit longer now, but there wasn't far between the driveway and the front door there.
The youngsters.
But literally thinking, I don't know how I'm ever going to get through this.
Yeah.
Every news channel, they're
close the curtains.
They're rerunning it,
sure.
And so there are moments where you think there is no way forward, but there is. And you need help. You need good support around you. You need good friends, good family, but there's always a way through these things, step by step, I think.
It's funny, in the background there's always a couple of questions in my mind when I'm talking to people like you, and one of them might have been when we first sat down, why did you want to write a book on leadership? But with about 20 minutes of this to go, you had to, didn't you?
Well, I think that I've been in so many situations throughout my life where I think there are things that if I was younger, when I read other books, I learned a lot from reading other books.
Yeah.
Of course, there's all your lived experiences, but if you only learn from your lived experiences, it's going to take you a long time to learn everything you might need to know.
And you can't have all of them.
No, and you want to be as well prepared as you can be. And the other part is, I think the role I had is such a high-profile leadership role that it puts you into situations that are quite extreme. And I wanted to explain a little bit about the madness of that role I had. So it's been really rewarding that people have sent messages saying, like any book, people pick up different parts of it. This bit really resonated, this bit I hadn't thought about. That was why I wrote it. It was a bit cathartic going through it as well. But, I am passionate about leadership, and I think we need, perhaps more than ever, strong leaders in our country, in the world generally, because, we've got to have more optimism, and if we can help develop good young leaders, then the future of our country will be in a better place. Simple as that.
One of the things that struck me most was something I hadn't really realised before, because it's not the section of the bookshop I go to first, and I don't. I mean, it will obviously get filed alongside other books that are kind of about leadership or about business or the motivational speaking kind of world, but in print. And one of the things that struck me most was that it's actually important to everybody, whether you're going to be a leader or whether you're going to be led. Having a better understanding of this stuff is incredibly valuable. It's not just for people who want to be CEOs or England managers. It's for everybody to understand the dynamic of teams and human progress, really.
Well, I think whenever I've travelled to schools, businesses, organisations, there are some common themes that always come out. Yeah. Normally, you've got to work with a team of people. It's very, there'd be the odd industry that doesn't, but it's very rare you're not in some sort of a team. There's a need to get the best out of people. Sometimes that's having challenging conversations that most people would rather avoid, but by avoiding them, we don't get the best out of people.
And you make things worse.
Well, that can also be the case. Very often we're dealing with difficult personalities, but they can actually be the most productive people in your business as well. So how do you get those creative talents to buy into that team ethos? And so, yeah, although it's in football, I hope that the lived experiences people will translate into their own world. I know I find myself doing it. It's a bit sad, but I read books on a different topic and I kind of align it to what's going on in my life or my world or what my kids are doing. Or
I don't think that's sad at all. I think that's why people write these books.
Yeah.
That's why you wrote yours, and it will be. I mean, it will work for people. It will be helpful and useful to people who don't know one end of a football from another.
Yeah, well,
because these are human stories.
Yeah, I think that's why I didn't want to go too deep into the football technical part, because people like your wife, and my wife, not particularly interested in the football element of it, but I think they can relate to the stories.
In the context of your story, where oddly you did it the wrong way around, didn't you? After the Middlesbrough sacking, I mean, very unfairly, after beating Derby, I think he gave you the boot, didn't he? You just got 2.
Yeah, but we'd been. but he could have done it months before.
Of course,
so
because the reason I said you hit the ground running, you go from manager of the month to I think an 11-run losing streak. And so these are baptisms by fire. But then you do at the international level the stuff that perhaps you can't say should have done, but might more obviously have done. In the background, working with all of the teams as head of elite development, and Trevor Brooking, somebody else who's got that kind of slightly more cerebral approach, I think, to the game. And now you're doing your leadership apprenticeship, despite having had quite a high profile leadership job already. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. If what I learned about the development of young players in that period taught me so much and would have been a great grounding. And the downside of that, of not doing that first, is that what happened to me at Middlesbrough, some people look at my record as a manager and still say, well, failed at Middlesbrough, what chance would he have anywhere else? But that's like criticising me as a 16-year-old player compared to a 28-year-old international player. What I knew then and the experiences I'd had, so different. And young people will be promoted into roles that they're going to struggle with at the start. So again, in other walks of life, they shouldn't lose confidence. There is a process of learning here. You've got to go through this learning to get to where you need to get to, and it isn't overnight success. It isn't immediate. Everybody goes through these challenges. So. I did end up, but I guess because I was able to reflect on, what did I get wrong at Middlesbrough? What didn't I know that I needed to know? It meant that when I had the experiences after that, I was able to learn with some evidence of the realities of the job rather than it just being theory. And again, I think you could write a book about theory, but here I have gone into the areas I got wrong, the realities of things I got wrong.
The practice.
And I think you've got to go through those practical experiences to be able to improve and learn.
Did you have any inkling when you were head of elite development, and then there's a little hiatus, isn't there, 2012, 2013, you come back managing the under-21s. Did you ever allow yourself to think that you might possibly be in pole position when these youngsters started coming through to the adult team? Because it's an odd thing to do in the context. I mean, I know that the tournaments you play as the under-21s are an end in themselves to the players, to the manager, but to the country. We watch an under-21s game and we're automatically thinking about the senior final for 2 years down the line or 6 years down the line. Do you do that as a coach? Were you ever thinking about what the building blocks you're assembling now might become later, and will I still be the architect then, or could I be the architect then?
Never thought at that point about being manager of the senior team at all.
Okay. Because it would be odd given the lack of club experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what I wanted to do was one thing we've been world class at over the years are root and branch reviews of what's going wrong.
God save us from root and branch reviews.
So the great thing is, in the last 10 years, we haven't had to have one of those. But so if we've done nothing else, at least we've done that. But no, I literally went in because there were recommendations to improve youth football from grassroots football, which is about the enjoyment of kids, frankly, through to international junior football, and we were building St George's Park at the time, the new National Football Centre. So there were some great projects that I was invested in. And then with the under-21s, it was a chance to coach some of the best players and try to help their pathway through to the senior team. So, you know, I was realistic. I didn't have the track record to be considered for the senior team. And I'd also lived through watching people like Graham Taylor, Bobby Robson, you know, what that role had entailed for them, their families. So, no, it wasn't something I had any great enthusiasm for at all.
Of course not. I mean, I've often thought that, and I used to have this conversation with my godfather, that if you were if you were German or Brazilian or Argentinian, then the British newspapers would almost be allies of you when it comes to undermining certainly the managers and the players, but particularly the managers. A hideous treatment that younger people listening to this now would struggle to think was even true. The turnip stuff with Taylor, the really vicious personal abuse that went far beyond anything that was happening on the pitch. I can see why you wouldn't fancy that. But the world was changing a little bit by now. And you have a nightmare in 2015 with the under-21s. But you've already spotted people like Harry Kane and John Stones. You respond to that in the way that you've just been explaining. You learn from it. You come back the following year in Toulon. The senior team is having a bit of a nightmare at Euro 2016. And then you get the call, Sam Allardyce suffers from a little local difficulty, and you get the nod, only for 4 games initially, but now you are allowing yourself to think that if the 4 games go well, everything changes.
Yeah, but by that point, I'd been asked to apply for the job the previous summer. Again, I didn't think there'd be enthusiasm for an internal appointment. So, and you've when you're stepping into a role like that, you need some sort of support, or at least not a lobby that's vehemently against you. But when the caretaker role came up, there was nobody else in a good position to take the team.
Partly because of what we were just talking about. I mean, if you wouldn't want it, you wouldn't want to move across from a big club job at the time.
No, but also there were 3 days before a World Cup qualifier, so it was going to be impossible to go and get a manager from a club. And I had taken a lot of the team when they were younger, and I knew the rhythm of an international calendar. So, yeah, it was you're in the role by default. We had a good run in those 4 games, and then by then I knew, well, actually, I think the players are buying into the way we're working. I think there's a little bit of buy-in from the public, not huge, but they're probably thinking, well, we've had a go with foreign managers, we've had a go with it, we might as well give this bloke a chance.
He owes us. He owes us.
Well, that's right, yeah, he's in deficit, so let's see how he gets on. So yeah, that was the moment where I thought, no, actually, I feel as though I can step in and do this, but prior to that point, that had never been. I'd had an ambition to play for England,
sure,
but I'd never had an ambition to manage England until that point.
And the planets align. I mean, there's a bit of serendipity here, but goodness me, you needed to have your ducks in a row to take advantage of that roll of the roulette wheel that suddenly came up for you. And this is now very much the part of the story that everybody will be familiar with. The trajectory that you're on now leads to, albeit that, you know, we never had the moment of lifting the trophy in many ways when you did resign and say, after the second Euro final, it's a lovely line, this. It has been the honour of my life. We've made England fun again. Thank you for that. I mean, it was... Yeah. I could get quite emotional about it now. I really can. But it was... I mean, you changed the world.
Well, when you're in sport, you're always thinking about the trophy you might have won.
Of course.
So you always want that bit more. But... I think we came so far, and yeah, we did have a big impact. And the team now, I guess any leader, you're looking at what was the situation when you arrived and what did you leave behind. And whatever people think, I think they would accept that we're in a stronger position now. And a lot of the barriers for the team towards winning have been broken through. You know, we hadn't won a knockout game in 10 years. We hadn't won a penalty shootout in 7 attempts. We hadn't been to a final for 50 years. So there's now far more belief. There's more belief in the team. supporters aren't hiding behind the sofa when things go to penalties.
Right.
And, that's, in my more sober moments, they're the things I do reflect on and think, we made a positive difference there.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Two more questions. The first is something you mentioned to me before the tape started rolling. You haven't been to see James Graham's play, Dear England. You didn't see Rafe Fiennes play Gareth Southgate.
No.
Why not?
Well, James wrote to us when he was first had the play as a concept, and I think that was after the first Euros final, and I felt that our story was still going on. It wasn't finished. Yeah. So then the idea of sitting watching a play about you,
of course,
and also some of the things that happened, that there is drama elements to that
of course,
when you're sitting knowing everything that happened and you know all the individual characters, that would have felt a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah. So but
then he rewrote the ending to accommodate what happened, and you still
well, I haven't seen any of the endings, but I mean, by the way, I have subsequently met James for lunch. I think he's a brilliantly talented writer.
For sure.
And I've seen his other play, ironically, Punch, which is incredible focus. So, yeah, it just felt an awkward thing to do, really.
You're a very busy man. Any unscratched itches? I mean, because you mentioned with age, things change. Could you conceive of going back into any level of the game at all at any point in the future? Yes or no answer, Gareth?
I can't do yes and no's because, you never ruled it out. But I've had, one of the biggest jobs in world football, and the bigger fact for me is it had a purpose. I'm so passionate about my country, so one of the things I am hoping to do is continue to help young people in our country. That matters to me, and I think it's an area, because of the roles I've had, where I might be able to have some impact. So that feels at this moment in my life more important to me than playing the same film out again in a football club.
It's been an absolute privilege to sit down with you. It really has. Dear England, Lessons in Leadership by Gareth Southgate is out now, and I hope in the course of this hour we've established why this isn't just the book that you could write, it's a book that you kind of had to write. Gareth, thank you very much.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.